Bill Webb, and when I left the Navy in 1978, I was a lieutenant. This was when I was in high school, Matt, and we had a recruiter come by my high school in Williamstown, Kentucky, saying they were looking for some people, some guys with good grades, and were involved in class leadership and sports and so forth. And he had that conversation with our school principal, and my principal, and I want, forever for this, gave him my name, and that was I knew nothing, but I had watched Army-Navy football games with my dad, who was an Army veteran, by the way. I was one of 6 children, and my dad had gone off to war, served in the Pacific with 3 little urchins at home, and I was number 5 in the list. Their first 3 children were girls, and I bring that up because in my mom's last few days I was spending time with her in a nursing home, and was trying to have some uplifting moments with her, and I said, Mom, if you could think of the happiest day in your life, what would that be? And without hesitation, she said, oh, Bill, that would be the day that your brother was born. And I'm, oh, Mom, I'm here. Where's he? I'm here. But the deal was, after 3 girls, they wanted a boy, and that was a very big deal. And that's when my dad had gone off to the Pacific in the Army. His name was Jefferson Edgar Webb, and he served in the Philippines and New Guinea, and at the end of the war, before the bomb was dropped, his unit was getting all new equipment, and they knew they were headed for the invasion of the island of Japan. So dropping the bomb may be the only reason I'm here. Otherwise, that was going to be a bloody mess. Williamstown, Kentucky had a small lake. I love boats and the water, and I guess just had. They said I could go to. I could apply for an appointment to any of the 3 academies, and I chose the Navy because that's what I liked. We did not have political connections. I was a 5th alternate, but there had not been a service academy graduate for years and years. Williamstown, Kentucky is a very small town, and somewhere in the 20s or 30s, there had been a West Point graduate in town. That was it. So when word got out in town that the Naval Academy had an interest in me, that was big news. I mean, I was having all kinds of people pat me on the back, congratulate me, tell me what an honor that was, even though I was a 5th alternate. So there's a process for handling applicants, and the political nominations go along with becomes part of the application package that are reviewed at the academy, but there's a board that reviews those, and although the recommendations are given very heavy weight, there are exceptions, most notably for some athletes that are are being recruited by one of the athletic programs, and they can kind of pick and choose. Oh, that looks like a good candidate. We want that guy. And for whatever reason, they looked at me down as a fifth alternate and said, we'd like to give the nomination to this guy. Not because I was an athlete. Well, I was an athlete. I played basketball in Kentucky, of course. But I was not a Division I athlete, I'll put it that way. I would say that just the size and the grandeur of the campus, I liked everything about it, I'll be honest. Where I came from, this is pretty sweet. A lot of guys were kind of hard for them to adjust to the upperclassmen being harsh with them and that sort of thing. But I had to have an older brother, the one that my mom loved so much. But he was hard on me. And so having had that older brother experience, the academy was an easier adjustment. I liked it. And of course, Bancroft Hall, if you've seen it, looks like Hogwarts was modeled after it. It was just, the whole thing was overwhelming. I enjoyed it very much. I remember that the academics for me were a struggle. I'll take math for an example. In my high school in Kentucky, our math teacher, we only had one, and she was a history major, and I had taken the curriculum that I was going to have as a plebe and said, what's this calculus all about? And my math teacher tells me, so, calculus, I've heard of it, but I can't tell you much. I don't know about it. That first year was a catch-up for me. I had to run hard and fast to catch up with. I didn't realize until later about half of our class had college, had a year of college before they got to the academy. And I did not. I was called direct entry. So I mentioned the little lake in Williamstown, and I was a good swimmer. So I thought, well, I'll go out for the swimming team. That's how little I knew or understood about college athletics. And so I show up for tryouts, and the swimming coach is there with his assistants, and they all had their clipboards, and they're looking on their clipboards for my name as a recruit. And of course, I wasn't recruited for swimming, but as far as I knew, I was the best swimmer I'd ever, unlike Williamstown anyway. And they said, okay, kid, well, what's your event? What do you, and I told them, I can do them all. You name it. Okay, well, give us a lap down and back freestyle. I said, okay. So I swam my lap, went down, and I had never swum competitively. So there was that issue of the turn, which I had seen it, so I knew what it looked like. And I nailed it. I thought, oh man, this is going to be a great time. So now I swam back, hopped out of the pool, and I was just expecting to, my expectation was these guys were going to be all wide-eyed looking at their stopwatches going, wow, look at this. And I jumped out of the pool, and their clipboards were all scattered around on the floor. Like, oh, you still here? So that was, and as many of my classmates and I have talked, we we had the same conversation with coaches after that day of which sport are you going to be playing for us. It was the arm around the shoulder. Well, what other sports did you play in high school? I had that conversation, and I went off, I don't know, played water polo or squash or something else. But no, I was not a Division I athlete in any sport. We were midshipmen at the academy in the summers of '68 and '69. And, you know, we talked today about the turmoil of January 6th and other things. But boy, I got to tell you, Matt, the summers, it wasn't a singular day, the entire summers of 1968 and '69, there were chaos, turmoil in Washington, D.C., and I can remember one crazy night that a rumor got started that that rioters from D.C. were going to come to Annapolis and set the Naval Academy on fire, and that we were going to be sent out with our M1 rifles, which were not operable. We just used them for parades, but we were going to set out as sentries around the academy to protect it from the rioters. I do remember that, but those are the Vietnam riot years. It was the war, race riots, political upheaval, assassinations. Those were chaotic times. We were in an enclave. It was newspapers and word of mouth. We were perhaps less protected than today, where we have, professional. You don't want to mess around with the Marines. We didn't have Marines. We had Jimmy Legs. Those were the civilian, kind of like night security guys that were posted at the gates. They were called Jimmy Legs because if they saw a midshipman who was hopping over the wall to get back in or whatever, they took it upon themselves to chase us down. Well, that was that chase would last for a minute or two, and then the guard would be out of breath and they'd have to stop. Of course, the midshipman could run all night. You'd run until you look back and you saw that the guard couldn't keep up with it anymore. That's their legs would start to quiver. They'd get the Jimmy Legs. That's why they were called Jimmy Legs. The first summer after plebe year, I had a summer cruise on the USS Columbus. The size of it, I had my boating experience, but it was, little boats on Lake Williamstown, and to see a massive guided missile cruiser, oh my gosh. I was very organized with the size, the complexity, and how well organized things were. They had us do all the dirty little jobs they had been procrastinating on, and we've got some midshipmen on board. Great. Had a friend who was on the Oklahoma City, which was one of the older cruisers. I was on the Columbus was a guided missile cruiser. It was more state of the art, whereas the Oklahoma City still had teak decks. And they of course weren't varnished, they were raw teak. They made those guys get out with the old holy stones, and every midshipman had a stick and a holy stone. They'd get out and sing dirges and scrape the teak. But I didn't have that. We were in the enlisted men's berthing space, so I think the bunks, if I recall correctly, were probably stacked from floor to ceiling about 4 high. So, you know, you had enough room to slide in, but that was it. Once you were in your rack, you couldn't sit up. You had to lay out. Food was fine. I had modest expectations, and they were, so my culinary expectations were low. They were more than that. That was fine. We went to the Caribbean, went to Puerto Rico, Ponce, Puerto Rico, and there was San Juan and Ponce. Of course, those were both had ports. Ponce, of the two, was the very classic, traditional, legendary part of the city, whereas San Juan was more metropolitan. It was like a time warp to go into Ponce, Puerto Rico in 1966 with all the traditions and local culture. It was an experience. Did Navy stuff. We got to shoot some missiles and got to shoot the guns, chip some paint, and went to New Orleans, which was a second class summer back in the late 60s. Was kind of indoctrination or exposure to all the service options. So we spent a little time in New London, Connecticut. When I say a little time, I think it was maybe a week. Submarines, the first thing is the smell of a submarine. The old diesel boats is memorable. Wasn't offensive, but it wasn't great either. But, you know, having all those men crammed in such a small space didn't help either. But we spent some time with the Marines down in Little Creek, Virginia. And just a little snippet, I remember the first night with the Marines, and got all checked in, and we were on the deck of a troop carrier, and they had some kind of boxed lunches or something they were going to feed us, which they did, and of course it took a little time. More time than what the gunny sergeant cared for that was overseeing the evolution. And he got a little irritated at us, and he said, you know, we can feed 500 Marines in less than 20 minutes. You little yahoos. Here we are. All right, let's go, let's pick it up. Some wise ass in the back said, well, that may be, but we use knives and forks. Oh, the wrong thing to say. We ended up jogging laps around the deck of the troop carrier. But so that started with the submarine indoctrination. Spent a little time with the Marines, a week, but that was more than enough as far as I'm concerned. And then went down to Pensacola for flight training. Had 8 full weeks of flight training. Almost half of it was classroom training, and then we got to fly the old T-34s and T-28s. That was great. I loved flying, but I didn't have 20/20 vision, so I was not a candidate for aviation. Then on my first class cruise, my senior year at the academy, was on a Fram destroyer, the Fleet Rehabilitation and Modernization Program, FRAM, and joined it in Liverpool, England, summer of 1969. So the Beatles had kind of gotten out of Liverpool, but it was still the hot and up and coming thing. So Liverpool was fun. Then we went to Oslo, Norway, and I could still remember going up the fjords and standing bridge watches with one of my classmates and the crew. There was the William R. Rush. The crew they were terrific. There were a couple of us that could drive ships, boats. We were seaworthy. My classmate and I were on the bridge together and piloting up the fjord, and I thought at the time, they're sure trusting us with a lot. But as I think back, the cliffs of those fjords were almost vertical, and you weren't going to run aground. You'd hit the side of the fjord first, because it just went straight down. God knows how many fathoms. So we had plenty of water, walls on either side of us. Spent time in Oslo, Great Liberty, and then we transited the Atlantic back to Newport, Rhode Island, where the Rush was home ported. And on the way, we had just left Norway. We picked up a Russian sub and tracked it for about 3 days. And it was such an experience. First thing in the Navy, that was cool. Never forget that. So that was my senior and last summer training at the academy. General engineering degree at the academy. I didn't do anything special. After graduation, and I had picked the Lloyd Thomas on service selection night, largely because my plebe year roommate, my roommate's name was Thomas. His name was John Thomas, and John was a casualty of academics. And when I went up to the big board with all the service selection choices, and I saw Lloyd Thomas, and I said, maybe that's fate. So I picked the Lloyd Thomas, and it was home ported in Hawaii, and that was cool, especially for a kid from Kentucky to go to somewhere exotic and tropical. I picked the Lloyd Thomas, and as I look back on it, boy, what a lucky choice that was. Turned out to be a great ship. My first school assignment from there, because the Thomas needed a CIC officer, the Navy sent me to a anti-submarine warfare school, an ASW school. Went down to Glencoe, Georgia, and I had gotten married a couple of days after graduation. My wife Linda and I went down to Glencoe, Georgia, and spent 6 or 8 weeks down there, and then the two of us flew out to Hawaii, and the ship was already deployed. Lloyd Thomas was deployed to Westpac, Western Pacific. The XO's wife helped us get settled in, in Hawaii, and we spent a couple of weeks in Hawaii until the Navy had room on a flight out to the Philippines to fly me out to catch the ship. Linda flew back to Silver Spring, Maryland, to be with her mom and dad till I got back from deployment. I caught the ship mid-deployment in Subic Bay, Philippines, reported aboard, and then that night went out on Liberty and infamous Alongapo in Subic Bay. And the very next morning we got underway, and by that evening we were on the gun line in Vietnam. So I went from one day I'm on the beach in Honolulu, and within 48 hours I'm on the gun line. And I was the previous CIC officer, Pete Shutter was his name, had left the ship the day I arrived, maybe the day before. So he and I did not have a face-to-face change of command. So going from civilian life, going to the gun line, and we had fire missions that very first night. And you say, well, my impression was, my God, I cannot believe that I'm being entrusted with this job that I have to provide gunfire support to some Marines who, they want your gunfire support, but they don't want to get shot by us. And that was a heavy responsibility. I did not have a chief assigned to my division, so I was very dependent upon the enlisted guys, petty officers in my division. I had the radarman OI division, and those guys, I mean, this was mid-deployment, so they all knew, they knew their job, they knew what they were doing. And I had been, the Navy had thoroughly prepared me. I don't want to give you the wrong impression. I had all the classroom work you could hope for to prepare me for that job, but there's a difference between doing things in the classroom and, actually doing it where you're firing 5-inch guns in a combat situation. The operation was being on what they called the gun line. For the Navy, much of the Navy, at least for surface ships, the gun line, the job was twofold. It was to be there to provide plane guard support following an aircraft carrier. So if they had a man overboard or an aircraft go overboard on landing, whatever, the plane guard ship would be right there to make the recovery. So there was plane guard duty. The other, though, which was the primary mission where we spent most of our time, was on the gun line, and that was naval gunfire support to the forces ashore, Army and Marines. We had twin 5-inch 38 mounts, and the range of a 5-inch gun is we'll just say 8 to 10 miles. I actually couldn't see them because I was in CIC, which is an enclosed space where all the radar equipment, radar repeaters, and so we didn't have visual. I made 2 deployments on the Thomas. The first one was in progress when I joined the ship, and I was deer in the headlights, new guy, like I said, coming off Waikiki, coming off the beach, and next thing you know, I'm on the radio talking to some poor bastard on the beach that's begging for gunfire support because they're getting overrun by North Vietnamese. Second deployment, I was very quickly go from deer in the headlights, new guy, to one of the more seasoned members of the crew. Been there before, had done that. Now I'm prepared to show the other guys, this is what you need to do and how you need to do it and what to expect. And it was in that second deployment that Lloyd Thomas was one of the principals in the only land-air sea battle we've had since World War II. And that was at Dong Hoi, which was just north of the DMZ. And very little has ever been published about Dong Hoi. What little is out there now has come from North Vietnamese sources, not U.S. Navy. We were never provided with an encompassing intelligence picture of what was going on in the war, what the objectives were, and so on and so forth. It was, even at the ship level at that time, information was pretty much down at the tactical level. So we knew that the following day we were going to be assigned to a 4-ship task force to go bombard a North Vietnamese airfield in Dong Hoi. And there were 2 Fram destroyers. There was Lloyd Thomas and the USS Higbee. There was our flagship, it was the Oklahoma City, that had commander of the 7th Fleet. And there was a guided missile cruiser, USS Sturret, which it had been DDG-31, but they had been outfitted with some modernized equipment. And in those days, they had all the Navy triad of missiles was Tartar, Terrier, and Talos. Tartar being closer, being more of a close-in weapon system. Terrier being the mid-range, now standard missile system. Talos was the long range. Long range being 70, 80 miles. Anything from a mile or 2 out to 25 or 30 miles was a what was then called a Terrier missile, now a standard missile, and Tartar was more of a quick load within 3 miles or less. And I was kind of curious, why would we have the Sterret with us? The Higbee and the Lloyd Thomas we were the gunfire support. We had the 5-inch 38 guns, 2 mounts apiece. So we had a lot of surface capability. And the Oklahoma City had 6-inch guns, but Higbee and Thomas, this is what we'd been doing every day. So we were like World War II Leyte Gulf ready. We could crank them out. The mission, we knew that we were going to be assigned to this 4-ship task force to go bombard a North Vietnamese airfield at Dong Hoi. And that's about all we knew. We didn't know the bigger picture, which was Dong Hoi was in North Vietnam. So that was the North Vietnamese staging area for armament, supplies, equipment, personnel that they would send down Highway 1. Highway 1 being kind of the North Vietnamese version of I-95. That was the north-south route. And they would stage their stuff, their supplies, equipment, personnel, so forth, in Dong Hoi, take it through the DMZ to just the other side of the DMZ, which was Quang Tri. Quang Tri that's an ancient North Vietnamese city. A lot of just culture, and that's where the temples and stuff were. Of course, during the war, it got torn to shreds, but they would start at one side of the DMZ at Dong Hoi, get everything into trucks, ship it down to Quang Tri. Quang Tri is where Colonel John Ripley helped him blow up a bridge on Highway 1. Anyway, all we knew was we were to report in to part of this task force, which we did, and late morning reported into the task force, and we were in this 4-ship line abreast heading toward the beach. Then we do what's called a Corbin turn, where you're in a line abreast, all line across, made our 90-degree course alteration, which allowed us to unmask our guns. You know, you can't shoot, you know, directly behind you with your forward gun mount, or else you're going to be shooting at your bridge, and you can't rotate the aftergun mount forward because you'll be aiming at the bridge from the stern of the ship. But after you go down and you make that turn, now you've unmasked the guns that can shoot. So we went in close to the beach. We had been 20 miles off the coast, out of visual range, of course, but also under surface search radar wouldn't pick us up either because of the curvature of the earth. So we go down, make our Corbin turn, start shooting, and we have an observer in the air flying a Lamps helicopter off the Sterret. Might have been Oklahoma City. It doesn't matter. We make the turn. We get guns free. We start unloading on this airfield. And within 2 or 3 minutes, we had demolished that place. Whatever targets, they had given us coordinates of specific targets. And you keep shooting at that same coordinate, you're going to be shooting into a hole in the ground that you've already blown. The airfield was not usable any longer. What we did not know, and this is where that part of they don't tell you everything, and I don't know how much U.S. intelligence knew at the time, but what we do know now is the North Vietnamese had an alternate military airfield in the outskirts of Dong Hoi. It was not near the main airport, but it was a camouflaged airport that only had room for 4 MiG-19s, 4 MiG-21s. They kept them under wraps, and they knew we were coming. We had gone into the beach, made our turn to the south. Vietnam is kind of a southwest, northeast, runs diagonally, it doesn't run. Coastline is not north-south, it's northeast, southwest. We had made our run down the gun line, blew up had already blown up more than what they had really needed to or intended to. Got as far south, made a 180-degree turn to come back the other way, and by now the they had 4, but there were only 3 that made it out to our task group. There were 3 MiGs that arrived. Now, I'm going to tell you something that was not known by us anyway at the time, but since it's been long enough, 50 years, North Vietnamese talked about it. They had military advisors from Cuba. The Cubans, after the Bay of Pigs debacle, had initiated a program to train pilots and to protect and to develop, to perfect bombing techniques on surface ships. And never had, the Cuban military never had to use that, but they, had there been a second Bay of Pigs or another assault on the island of Cuba, the Cubans would have been ready. They sent military advisors to the North Vietnamese who were flying Red Chinese MiGs. Cubans, of course, flying Russian MiGs, but same plane. And our order in the task force, after we had made the turn and were coming back up, was at the tail end was the Higbee, Lloyd Thomas, Oklahoma City, and then all the way back to the north where we had started was the Sterret. And we made the turn, and the MiGs caught up to us and made a bombing run on Higbee, and using what the Cubans, military advisors, had trained them to do. They got a direct hit on the Higbee, 500-pound bomb that hit directly on their after gun mount, which most fortuitously was vacant at the time because the Higbee had a foul bore, had a projectile stuck in one of their 5-inch guns. And they evacuated the crew from the mount so they could put what was called a short charge and eject the projectile. So that was the good news. The bad news was that the bomb hit the gun mount, went through the gun mount, and exploded below the gun mount. That's where the magazine is, and started a horrendous fire. And a classmate of mine, Ross Desert, was the damage control assistant on Higbee, the DCA. He led fire teams down into the magazines directly below, which were out of control fires from the bomb, 500-pound bomb, to extinguish those. But we had circled back around and came up alongside the Higbee. I was in CIC. I had the encrypted phone. It was what we called, it was a KY8 encrypted phone, so you didn't have to use code words, you could just talk plain language. And I'm the CIC officer. I'm talking directly to the captain of the Higbee, and our captain had told me to call the Higbee's captain to see what help we can get. Tell him we can send some fire teams over to help put out the fire. And this is one of those lock in your mind moments. Captain Higbee says, that fire in the magazine's out of control right now. You guys, you're too close. You should probably open up at least 500 yards. Get away from us, because I don't know if that's gonna cook off the magazine or not. Of course, I wanted to make sure that got to the captain. The captain of the Higbee wants us to open. He didn't want us to send anybody over right now. He said, open on out, 500 yards. So, but that was kind of the wrap up of the land portion of the battle that day. We made a total mess of their airfield and everything. Fuel, man, when those fuel tanks went off, the secondary explosions were awesome. The land portion of the battle, we tore up their airfield. The the air portion of the battle were the MiGs getting a hit on the Higbee, which, by the way, Ross Desert and his guys got the fire put out before there were any secondary explosions on Higbee, but of course it made a mess of the gun mount and the magazine, and they had to go back and to Subic in the Philippines for repairs. We proceeded north and east, and that's where we picked up contacts coming down from the north. I'm in CIC looking at the radar screen where the first deployment, you're looking at a radar and all you see the little flashes of lights that are contacts, and that's all they are, little point of light. But by the second deployment, you don't see a little round dot of light. Your mind immediately kicks in with where it's coming from, what the speed is, and so forth. You're actually in your eye, you think you're seeing whatever it is. And there were two torpedo patrol boats coming down from the north. And I knew they were patrol boats because they were the speed, about 45 miles an hour, too fast for a surface combatant, too slow for a fixed wing aircraft. Knew they didn't have helicopters, so the only thing left is torpedo boat, and those were the OSA and Comar torpedo boats, and those were horrendous little platforms because they had the Styx missiles. They took the torpedoes off and mounted Styx missiles. Now the Russian equipment, communist equipment, they didn't have the capability to reload or do any maintenance. They would just mount this stuff on there, send them into a battle, and they'd launch them. And that would shoot once, disposable, one-time use only. And so we knew what we were engaging. We knew what they were, and that's where the Sterret came in, because by this time we had passed the Sterret. They were still in front of us, and tracking the torpedo boat, waiting for them to get into range so we could get guns free and start shooting. But our air search radars were designed. We had the Mark 1A. That kind of tells you all you need to know about how modern. We had, the first, we didn't have Mark 2, whatever. We had this old equipment that the radars designed for tracking, fire control systems for tracking fixed wing aircraft, not jets. So anyway, I can remember seeing a separation from the torpedo boat, and there's this next blip that's going across the screen at supersonic speed. Oh, okay, I know what that is. We had a piece of equipment, a radar receiver called a ULQ-6, which would analyze a radar signal. I knew what the frequency was of a fire control of a Styx missile. So I don't remember what the numbers were, but I knew, boom, I know what that is. That is not good. And so we're getting ready to engage with our World War II system, fire control system, to what was then cutting edge modern technology, and the Sterret took it under fire. Now, this is a capability that we did not know that we had in our Navy at the time, was a surface-to-surface capability. We could do surface-to-air. You're tracking something up in the sky, your radar can lock onto it, and you don't have all the ground clutter that you get from the waves in the water or trees on the shore that you have in a surface-to-surface engagement. So the Sterret immediately took out, there were 2 of the missile launches, and then they took out the torpedo boats. Now the missile launches, understanding that was the main risk in the war, but that's what the Terrier missile system was designed to do, and it worked as advertised. When they took the torpedo boats out, that was a surface-to-surface engagement that, like I said, that was kind of new. So anyway, and when you get a hit on something like that, it doesn't just disappear from the radar screen, because it leaves all kinds of debris in the air or wherever, and you get a different pattern. Looks like a chaff pattern looks like a cloud on radar, and it moves off at whatever the wind direction and speed is. So we knew we had good direct hits, and so that's the third. It was the land. It was a surface, land, air engagement that day, and Lloyd Thomas was a major part of it. We were there. I had submitted an after-action report, and I had a great vantage point for the whole day because I was in CIC with all the radar, all the communications, and all the monitoring equipment, and I could see and piece together what was going on. And the squadron staff over in the Oklahoma City was where the after-action reports were to go. And I knew the communications officer over there because his name was Tom Knott. He had been the communications officer on Lloyd Thomas. And he and I worked together a lot on handling classified documents and stuff. When he left Thomas, he went to the Oklahoma City. So the day after I submitted my report, I called Tom on the radio and asked him if they had gotten my report and what did they think of it. Was it any good? He said, yeah, he did. He said they liked it very much, Bill, but they said, if you made any notes on what you saw that day, he said, get rid of, burn them. He said, don't talk about it. And for better part of 50 years, there was nothing said about Dong Hoi and Cuban military advisors or a capability to conduct surface-to-surface engagements with Terrier missiles, which of course today that's all, there's nothing classified or secret about any of that. The standard missile today is the Terrier missile with an upgraded fire control system that can handle. Went to destroyer school in Newport, Rhode Island. Part of a group of my classmates. We'd all been division officers at the same time. We were part of what they call an accelerated group that went to destroyer school to become department heads. And then I put my papers in to get out of the Navy, and the Navy said, Bill, if you'll give us one more tour, we'll send you anywhere you want to go. You name it, but you got to give us one more tour. I said, okay, I'll do that. I'll give you one more tour. I want to go back to the Naval Academy and teach, which I did. I went back and I taught seamanship and tactics and celestial navigation for 3 years. A lot of free time. Got my master's degree on the GI Bill. Had a lot of time to play handball and other sports, golf, handball. It was great. It was shore duty. I'd never had shore duty. So at the end of that tour, they were trying, and the Navy was offering some opportunities for advancement and chance to go back to sea. I would have no part of sea duty again. Shore duty, civilian life, so I got out.